too, right? So we're gonna do. Come closer. We're going to do two songs, and then Dick Duerksen is going to have his time. So let's do 28. 28. Let's start with 28, shall we? 28. I shall see the King.
I shall see the King where the angels sing. I shall see the King someday in the better land on the golden strand, and with him shall ever stay. In his glory I shall see the King, and forever endless praises sing. 'Twas on Calvary Jesus died for me. I shall see the King someday. In the land of song, in the glory throng, where there never comes a night, with my Lord once slain, I shall ever reign in the glory land of light. In his glory I shall see the King, and forever endless praises sing. 'Twas on Calvary Jesus died for me. I shall see the King someday. I shall see the King, all my tributes bring, and shall look upon his face. Then my song shall be how he ransomed me, and has kept me by his grace. In his glory I shall see the King, and forever endless praises sing. 'Twas on Calvary Jesus died for me. I shall see the King someday.
Okay, we will do one more song. Can we do one more? Yeah. What is coming with our songs, right? Yeah. Let's do number 7. All hail the power of Jesus' name.
All hail the power of Jesus' name. Let angels prostrate fall. Bring forth the royal diadem, and crown him Lord of all. Bring forth the royal diadem, and crown him Lord of all. Ye seed of Israel's chosen race, ye ransomed of the fall. Hail him who saved you by his grace, and crown him Lord of all. Hail him who saved you by his grace, and crown him Lord of all. Let every kindred, every tribe on this terrestrial ball to him all and crown him Lord of all. To him all majesty ascribe, and crown him Lord of all. Oh, that with yonder sacred throng we at his feet may fall. Join in the everlasting song and crown him Lord of all. Join in the everlasting song and crown him Lord of all.
Thank you, everyone. Now we have Dick Duerksen as our guest speaker. Come on, don't be shy. We turn your time to you.
Thank you. All right, got it. Good morning. Yeah. When Harry Anderson and his wife arrived in Cape Town, South Africa, their assignment was to start a school for the blacks, those who had no idea what a school was or how to do anything about a school. That was the way it all began. They had been at Andrews University, which wasn't Andrews University, of course, at that point, was Battle Creek College, and he hadn't even finished. He still had almost a full year left before he would be able to actually be a Seventh-day Adventist minister. But the General Conference called and said, Harry, you got some skills. We need you in Africa. We need you there right away. We're going to take you to this place called Solusi, and we want you to start a farm and teach the people how to farm in ways that will be self-sustaining. And so Harry and his wife got on the boat, and in Cape Town, get to Cape Town. They got an old British train all the way across South Africa to the other side to Bulawayo. And when you get to Bulawayo, you have to get off of the train and you take now an ox cart. Now, just plain old ox cart. This is not anything fancy. This does not have rubber wheels. It doesn't have a four-wheel drive. It doesn't have any of that. It is simply an ox cart. And the ox cart they gave him had 2 oxen. If you've ever been anywhere around Bulawayo and Solusi, 2 oxen is like putting 1 cylinder in your car. The sand is so deep, so thick, so nasty, it's like clay, and it sucks you in. At one point later, Harry had an ox cart that he was taking north to another school, and a man from the General Conference came and said, I want to go with you. And so when GC dudes come, you go along, you bring them along. And so he put the guy in, and he said, now we've got, see our oxen? There were 8 yoke of oxen, 16 oxen in front of this wagon. And the General Conference man said, well, I can see obviously you're wasting our money, because there's no good reason that you would ever have 16 oxen to do a simple thing like pull this crazy. And the guy from the GC was just really ticked until they got to the swamp. And the 16 oxen weren't strong enough to get the wagon through the swamp. And so the GC guy and 2 other carriers and Harry took everything out of the ox cart, walked through the swamp to the other side, set it all down, and you have to take that on your back, and it took all day. And when they finally got the oxen in the cart to the other side, the GC guy said, can you put 32 oxen on this thing? But the first time he ever got there, he was given 2 oxen and an old beat-up cart. Go to Solusi. Well, it's about 7 miles outside of Bulawayo. You go through deep sand. You go through 2 completely different tribal cultures. And you get to the land that was given to the Seventh-day Adventist Church by Cecil Rhodes. Start a school. And Harry and his wife and 2 other families, 6 people total, were supposed to start a school. If you were to open the curtains here and look outside, Salusi looks just like your place. I was standing out here a little while ago thinking, I have stood at Salusi so many times. The only difference is that Salusi has giant termite mounds everywhere, and I don't see any out here in Christmas Valley. You know, they're missing. Harry took a long look at it and started thinking, the first thing I've got to do is get more water here. So he started talking with some of the natives, and before long, they had a bit of an irrigation process going. They didn't have any big irrigation sprinkler systems or anything like that. What they had was a ditch and a lot of malaria. During the first year, the other four, the two couples, died or left to go back to the United States. If you go to Salusi College University, it is now, and you go out to the little cemetery, you'll see their graves. The first people who came, except for Harry and his wife, they stayed. And so the General Conference sent two more families to help Harry, or to manage Harry, because he didn't know anything. He hadn't even graduated, right? And so they get there, and Harry's busy making this school go. He's teaching classes. His wife's teaching classes. They're teaching basic health. They're teaching everything that you would expect at a Seventh Adventist school in the middle of nowhere. And the other two families die or go home. And it's just Harry and his wife. And if you go to Salusi today, you'll see a memorial, a monument to Harry and his wife, because you couldn't kill them off. And that was Harry's comment. I don't care what the devil's got in terms of diseases. I've got Jesus. And they would ask, well, what about the other families? I don't know. But you know, for us, we're staying, baby. And they stayed and started Salusi Adventist College. After several years, very successful school beginning, huge farm as far as you can see. It's really wonderful. Harry's heart said, in the northern part of South Africa, which is in those days Rhodesia, today is Zambia, there are people who've never heard the name of Jesus. I've got to go teach them. And so he got in an ox cart and he headed north. And he went everywhere he could in what we would know back then as northern Rhodesia. And he looked for a spot that had the right kind of water and at least 7,000 acres that he could buy and turn into a school. It was a dream. It was a dream that was so big that the people at the General Conference laughed and said, you'll never find a place like that any of us could even begin to afford. One day he went to Chief Monzi, chief of a large tribe, all of central northern Rhodesia, central Zambia. And he looked and listened to Harry, and he said, I know Salusi. I want you to teach my people. Will you teach them about Jesus too? I will. Then I have some land to give you. And Chief Monzi gave Harry Anderson and the Seventh Adventist Church 7,000 acres and a spring that had never been dry, the best spring in all the land, Chief Monzi said. Six months later, Harry, one big ox cart, 16 oxen, wife and daughter, head north, across the Zambezi, past what we know today as Victoria Falls, deep into darkest Africa, to a spring that Harry Anderson owned for Jesus. When they got to the spring, Harry had already decided exactly where he wanted his house. And so he pulled the oxen in and parked them, and right in the parking area, you know, and they set up the tent and went sound asleep. In the morning, when Harry came out of the tent, He said, the way he describes it is, I went outside, stretched my arms to the Lord, and praised him for my new home. And by the way, this home, which is known as Rosangu, looks just like your land outside here. Flat as a pancake. There's just, you got to look a long way to see any hills. And lots of termite mounds and water right there, and a little forest around the water. And that's where Harry's planted his tent. And as he stretches, he says, I notice that there is a very tall African man standing by a tree looking at me. Good morning. And he spoke in Shona, which was the language that Harry had learned down in South Africa. And the other man spoke in very broken Shona. He says, you teach? Yes, I'm the teacher. You teach me? Yes, I will. Yes, we will build a school here and I will teach you. No, you teach me now. Today. And Harry said, well, I can't. I don't have a school. I don't have anything. I don't have any textbooks. I don't know your language. You teach? Yes, I'm a teacher. You teach me now. Well, Harry did his very best to ignore the guy. He went out into the small forest, cut down a tree, and started working on where he was going to put a real live wood house. And the man just watched all day. Well, in the next morning, Harry said, hopefully the guy's gone. He went outside. There were 3 men. You teach? Yes. You teach us. Now. So Harry went back into the tent to talk to his wife, and he said, what am I going to do? I came here. I've got to build a mission. I've got to build a house. I've got to build a school. I've got to make sure that this well is working. We've got to plant oranges. I brought oranges. We've got to plant oranges. And she looked at him and said, Harry, yeah? Did God ask you to come here and build a house or to teach Jesus? Get out there and do what God called you to do. So Harry walked outside. He had an axe, he had a shovel, he had a saw. And he looked at the 3 guys and he said, come help me. And they spent all morning cutting, planing, moving, planning. And then at noon, Mom fed them. Oh, real. And they never tasted anything so awesome. In the afternoon, he did his best to teach a little bit from what he had learned. And you know how you learn a language? You say, can I have the axe? Axe. You learn a word for axe. And then now that you've got it in Shona and Tonga, you're able to actually interact a little bit. And before long, Harry had this long vocabulary and was translating the book of Matthew for his new friends in what you know today as Rosangu Adventist University. I've spoken for commencement at Rosangu. I've stood there when 3,000 kids are graduating. It is the largest Adventist school in the world. And when you stand where Harry had his tent and you look down the row, for the well is now a well and a spring right there. It's Monze's spring. There's a road that goes to the ad building. And on both sides of that road, Harry Anderson and his guys planted camphor trees. Now, you know about camphor trees? Imagine a redwood. Redwoods grow straight, not a camphor. But redwoods are huge. But oak trees get big, but oak trees do something really interesting. Where a redwood goes up and lets out branches, an oak tree goes a little ways and starts branching everywhere. That's a camphor tree, except a camphor tree goes larger than a redwood. And the camphor trees on both sides of this road go so far. And you stand in front of Harry's old house, and you can see all the way with these giant trees. And Harry, when he was writing about it, 1901, he came back My grandfather went to a camp meeting where Harry Anderson spoke about his dreams, about what was happening in Africa. Grandpa says Harry started to cry. And he said, when I stand in front of my house and I see hundreds of the Tonga people all singing about Jesus and walking down the road between the trees, it's like going straight to heaven. A little while ago, you were talking about the transformations that comes in a person's life when they allow Jesus to take over. Harry Anderson's one of my pictures about that. I love this man. The deeper I dig, the farther I go, the more I understand Harry Anderson, the more amazed I am. One day at Salusi, they're living in a mud house. It's the only kind of house you can have around Salusi. There aren't any trees. And so if you're going to make a house, you got to make it out of mud bricks. You know, it's just like a dugout out in the West. I think you might find a couple of those somewhere south here without going too far. In this case, Harry's in his mud house. They've got fabric for windows. And both his wife and daughter have malaria. And Harry writes a letter to the General Conference. Dear General Conference Missions Committee, this is a request for 200 United States dollars so I can put windows in my house and keep the mosquitoes out. Please save my family. Well, you know, it takes forever. You've got to go through the list of all of the ways, the transports you've got to have before you can get that letter all the way back to Battle Creek. It takes 2 months. And so 2 months later, the GC Mission Committee opens the letter, reads it, answers it, and sends it back. It takes 6 months to get this done. And when the letter finally comes, Harry is so excited because he knows there's going to be $200 in it. And he opens and the letter says, and he actually has it in a book that he wrote years later. Dear Brother Anderson, thank you for your hard work. We appreciate all that you are doing and understand your request about glass windows. But we have decided in committee it is more important for you to live like the natives. And there's no money in the envelope. 6 months later, his wife has died of black water fever, which is worse than malaria. And what does Harry do? Does he become bitter and angry and tell the General Conference where they can get off? No. He comes home, spends 6 months going from camp meeting to camp meeting, talking about the people who come to Salusi who need Jesus. And he goes home. For home is no longer Indiana. Home is Salusi. It's Africa. And he and his daughter go back to live in a house with no glass in the windows. No bitterness, no anger, no, they ought to be, no, because there is no they in Harry Anderson's vocabulary. It's all him and what he does in me and others to reach others and help them become like him. When you stand as the graduation speaker at Rusango Adventist University, you look out there and there are physicians, there are nurses, there are nurse practitioners, there are no dentists yet when I did it, but practically every other career you can dream of being graduated from an Adventist school started by Harry Anderson when he was asked, "You teach? Teach me now." What a message. So I'm riding in a Land Rover one day in backcountry Zambia, way north of Rusangu, way back in, this is about as far as Harry would love to go and start another school. That's the kind of guy he was. There's a guy sitting next to me whose name is Life Mutaka. I don't know him from Adam. I just know that I got sat next to him in the Land Rover. My wife's over here. She's sound asleep, trying to sleep in the bouncy backcountry roads. It's in four-wheel drive, and we're bouncing everywhere. And I look over at Life, and I said, so what's your name? And he says, Life Mutaka. I said, Life? How did you get a name like Life? Because I was dead when I was born. I said, you got a story to tell me. Here's Life's story. It's very simple. Little tiny village, Nowheresville for us, but, big place for him. His mom is pregnant. His mom gets to the day of delivery. They call the local midwife. She comes over to help. Dad goes outside to pray to the spirits. And when the baby is finally born, the baby is dead. Just no breath. And the midwife, who's accustomed to this, whacks the kid on the rear and does all of the, take out the mucus and does all of the necessary. She's a nurse practitioner, if you will, doing the job as best as she can do it. And finally, she gives up. She takes the baby. She puts it on Mama's belly and says, this one's no good. Because that's the way you would say it in Africa. This one's no good. You need to get another. And Mother says, no, this is not. This is God's baby. It must be alive. And the nurse says, I'm sorry, and leaves. She is the only medical care person in the village. And a moment later, there's a knock on the door. A woman comes in and some other, and she names a village they've never been to, nothing about. And she comes in and she sits down beside Mom, picks up the baby, looks at him, breathes into his nostrils, and the baby coughs twice and then begins to scream. And Mama says it's the best sound I've ever heard in my life, a dead baby screaming. Yay! And then the lady midwife stood up and said, this one God needs. His name is Life. And she walks out. They never had seen her before. They never saw her after. At least that's what Life told me. And she said, and Life says, so all my life, I know that I am to live because Jesus Christ is living in me. And that is the only way I can breathe. It's the only way I can walk. It's the only way I can do anything. It's because of the power of Christ in me today. And I said, Life, what has that done for you? And he says, I have another story for you, Dick. What is it? You know Rusango? I said, yeah. He says, I know Rusango. I am chairman of the board at Rusango Adventist University. Well, I didn't know that. I did then. He said, all right, I have a story about my life that you need to hear. Have you been to the well, to the water at Rusango? I said, yes, I have stood there at Monzi's well, the water, it just bubbles up all the time. It's the most beautiful place. He says, I know. My father and 6 of his friends one day went to see Dr. Anderson. My grandfather tells me the story like this. We walked to Anderson's house, we had heard that he had something bright yellow and sweet. And we walked to his house and we stood in front of him and said, "Give us an orange." And Dr. Anderson said, "Gentlemen, I'm really, really sorry. I can't give you an orange. I have one orange left from all the trees that we have planted. And you know, I can't really give that to you because there's not enough for all of you to have one. But if you come back tomorrow, I will give you something better than an orange." And life says, so my grandpa came back. And when he came back with his 6 buddies, Elder Anderson said, "Come." And he took them out to where the orange grove was. And over to the side were 7 little pots with baby orange trees in them. Now, if you know anything about growing an orchard, a grove, if you will, of oranges, you know that the only way to do that is you've got to do a slip. It's not like you can take an orange seed, plant it, and get a tree. No, you got to go through a process of grafting. And Anderson's really good at this. Not sure where he ever learned it, but he's good at it. And so he's got these 7, and they're all ready. And he says, "Come, each of these are for you. Now let me show you where to plant them." And they planted a special row of 7 orange trees. And then he told them how to dig the hole, how to put the fish underneath it, how to irrigate it. And he said, if you water your tree every day for 1 year, I guarantee you it will have at least 1 orange on it. Really? Now that orange I told you I had yesterday? Yeah? I have done something. He pulls out his knife and he slices and gives 1 section to each of the 7 for you. And life says, Grandpa has described to me so many times what it's like to take 1 section of an orange and put it in your mouth and squeeze it between your teeth and try and get all the juice back in around your beard because it is so absolutely heavenly. And then Elder Anderson said, you have just gotten a small taste of heaven. And then life in this bouncing car says, Pastor Dick, that's our job. If we can give everyone we meet a small taste of heaven by who we are, how we are, and how we honor them. A year later, I had to ask, of course, what happened a year later with their trees? And he said, a year later, my grandpa and everybody else went back. And sure enough, everybody got at least 1 orange. And let me take you. And when we got the Rusango, he took me to the row that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And one of those is his grandpa's tree. There's still an orange grove at Rusango. Now, all of that's just stories, guys. It's just stuff that happened. And I've described to you a man who is so absolutely special to me that I think when we get to heaven, he will be in the Hall of Fame. He'll be wearing the bright jacket, and we'll say, Harry Anderson, I've heard about you, and all the rest of that. And he will all say the same thing. No. I'm no big deal. Because as we're driving along, I said, was Harry Anderson perfect? And life. Did I tell you anything about who Life is? Life went to elementary school, secondary school, college, got a PhD, became the Associate Director of Education for the country of Zambia. Did that for 22 years, retired, and became Director of Education for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the country of Zambia. Just retired again last year. He says, I can't quit. I was born to be alive. They didn't call me retired. Then all of a sudden he says, I have a story that you need to hear that you will never find in writing. Because we've kind of all agreed never to write it. And even though I write a story for Adventist World every month, I will probably never write this one because life hasn't given me permission to do it. One day, Harry, with a young African boy from Solusi, was taking an ox cart, 16 oxen, and he was going from Solusi to Bulawayo, and then from Bulawayo, the railroads still weren't going, and so you had to go all the way up the Zambezi, and then you had to cross the Zambezi on a ferry to get to the other side. And once you were inside of that part of Africa, then you could bounce on through the Rhodesian mud. So Harry had a whole bunch of stuff he was taking through Sangha. And they were running late, always running late. They came to the river. You'd love life. I'm 6'2" and weigh a little. Life's 6'4" and weighs a lot. He would be great to play for the Rams on the front line. He said they got to the river and the sun was setting. And Harry looked down, and the little African boy, maybe 10 years old, that was with him looked down. And Harry said, "Run and tell him we want to go tonight." And so the little boy ran down to the ferry to an old British sea captain who ran this ferry across the Zambezi River. And when the little boy got there, there was an argument, and Harry got there as fast as he could possibly get there, and the sun had gone down. And the old captain looked at Harry and said, "I'm not doing any more today. I'm tired, and I'm not going to take you across. You can come back tomorrow and come early next time." And Harry looked at him and said, "Go to hell, you old fat man." Have you ever felt like telling somebody that? Well, Harry did. He just cursed the dude right off into the Zambezi. And the man looked at him and said, "That's not going to get you passage." It's a sea captain. Harry, angry, set up camp, looking all night across the river to the hill with the acacias. That is such a perfect place to camp, and he had been dreaming of it for days. Stupid man. In the morning, put everything back in. Harry and his boy went down. Nobody said a word. Cross on the ferry, paid the man off, and our representative of the Christ, the loving, caring, compassionate Christ, drives his oxen. And then he looks at the boy and says, "You got to come see this at least." And he takes the boy up to his favorite acacia grove, his favorite camping spot on the north side of the river. There's a tent up there, old canvas tent. There's a wagon, and there's a bunch of goods in wooden boxes, and there's a pair of shoes, and that's all. And the boy looks big-eyed at Harry. "Do you know what happened here last night?" And there are lion tracks everywhere and a dusty trail where the lions drug the body of the old trader that they killed during the night. And life says, the little boy said, Pastor Anderson knelt down by the shoes and cried and cried and cried. And then he said, "You stay here for a moment." "No! You come with me. We'll go down." And they went back to the old man together, to the old sea captain. And Harry begged forgiveness.
Sometimes I am so me. I don't show Jesus well. I am so sorry. And the old man looked at him and said, I know you, and I knew you'd be back. But we're all broken, my friend. Wherever you go, remind people we can be whole. Is that a cool story? You know why it means so much to me? Is because it reminds me that I'm not always very good. Sometimes I miss it. You used, Carlos, you used Mark chapter 4 this morning for a bit. Can I show you two things in Mark chapter 4 in that story? You got your Bibles? Grab them, open them. Mark chapter 4 is all about Jesus talking to people. If you go back, it's really crazy. From chapter 4, verse 1, he went back teaching by the sea. A crowd built up to such a great size that he had to get into a little boat. And then he started telling them stories. He told them stories all day long. He told them stories late afternoon. And verse 26 says, in fact, he was never without a story. With many stories, he presented his message, fitting the stories to their experience and maturity. He was never without a story. So all this is over, and he's exhausted. And then you come to that wonderful verse in 35. Mark 4:35. Late in the day, he said to them, let's go across to the other side. And they took him in a boat, just as he was. It's the only time that phrase is used in the scriptures, in the New Testament. Just as he was. Do you know how he was? Exhausted. He could barely get into the boat. They had to carry him down the hill to put him asleep in the boat. And I would like to share that the reason that text is there, the reason this story is here, is it's God looking at us and saying, it's okay to be tired. It's okay to get off your tractor and barely find the energy to get home again. It's okay to have worked all night trying to do something with people and go back and realize if they ask you to do anything more, you won't be able to. You're too tired. And Jesus said, can we get out of here, please? That's what verse 34 says in my translation. Could we get out of here, please? I am exhausted. And they took him just as he was, and they put him in the boat. I love the use of put. The disciples lifted him up and sat him down in the boat. And then they went into the storm. And it didn't matter to Jesus that there was a storm. Oh, it terrified the disciples, but Jesus didn't worry about it because he knew that when the disciples got to the point where they really needed him, they'd shout. And the storm came. And they finally remembered Jesus. And those who had put him in the boat tried to unput him now. Jesus, Jesus, don't you realize that we're going to die? Wake up, wake up, wake up. And they're shaking him and shaking him. And have you ever been awakened from a really, really, really heavy sleep? Yeah, that's Jesus. He wakes up and he looks around and man, what day is it? Who am I? Why am I in a boat? Why is there a storm? And then all of a sudden everything comes all back together and he looks around and he sees a group of men looking down at him as if they are about to die of fright. Not of storm, but of self-centered. Yeah. And he looks at the storm and he looks at them. And for them, he says, wind, waves, stop. And the wind loses its breath. and the storm loses its power. And they're sitting together in the shallows on the other side of the lake. And Jesus says, "Oh, guys, when are you going to trust me?" And then the demoniac story happens, but that's a different sermon. So what I want to say to you today is, Harry Anderson transformed South Africa for Jesus, literally. And he did it by teaching about Jesus in the simplest possible way to people who understood no words he was saying, but recognized a desirable Jesus in everything he did. Because it was obvious who Harry was. He was different. He was wonderful. We want what you have. It's Jesus. Then we want him. That's Harry. And yet, imperfect, messed up, angry, tired, sad, belonging regardless. I believe Harry, the disciples at the edge of the Sea of Galilee, are simply a quick little story for us to say, you can trust Jesus because he's just like you. He gets tired. He does. And in his exhaustion, he never lets go of his Father. And he never lets go of the certainty that he is here for a reason. When life told me the stories, and we've talked many times, he looked at me and said, "Dick, can I ask you to do something for me?" Anything. Wherever you go, wherever you speak about me as life, do not speak of me. Speak of Jesus. For anything I have done, anything I am, is not me. It is Jesus Christ in me, the hope of glory. Lord Jesus, take my heart. I cannot even give it to you. It's already your property. But take me. And then raise me into a high and holy atmosphere where the rich currents of your love can flow through my soul. Amen. Amen. Happy Thursday. Have a party. Well, the weather's right. The food is good. What more could you ask for, right? Hey, God will make sure you hear whatever it is he brought you here to hear. And he does that regardless of us. And it's really cool. Thank you. Good. Whoop.
Well, I wasn't expecting this early, but it's good. Oh, I guess we all young at heart, right? Anyway, well, due to he's done early, I guess we can. You guys can join for lunch at 12 instead of 12:30. Sounds good? Okay. 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 Everyone may be dismissed.